I'll quickly introduce myself. As you might be able to see, I am in the Tramshed, which is Tramshed Tech in Cardiff, co-working space, collaborative tech hub for the co-working communities across digital tech and creative. As you might also see, it's closed. We're still in Wales in lockdown. I know some big announcements being made by the Prime Minister Boris Johnson today about what's happening in England. That does have an overspill effect into Wales, but we do work separately. We're anticipating being open again from July the 6th onwards, which would be great. So you might see a couple of our guys walking behind us, but we are largely shut. Normally we work as a collaborative venue, as I say, across the whole of Cardiff, across the whole of South Wales. And I think that's the way that we approach, if you like, clustering and communities. We have a local cluster here in Cardiff. We are about to expand into more spaces within Cardiff itself in the city centre. But we also extend as far west from Cardiff to Carmarthen in West Wales. We extend east to Newport with new spaces we're taking on there. And from Newport to Newtown in mid-Wales and to Pontypridd in the Welsh Valleys. Increasingly as well, we're working with our partners, our colleagues in the UK Tech Cluster Group. So we have some big plans to move actually eastwards into collaborative ways of working with our Bristol colleagues in TechSpark. Again, more of that at a later date. Watch this space. And that's part of what we're hoping that James can fill in from the Bristol perspective. But then we also work on a national basis with those cluster partners and internationally. Again, this is where we think critical mass and working collaboratively and creating clusters could be really effective. So we already have a formal partnership deal with the Guinness Enterprise Centre in Dublin. We are developing the same with Station F in Paris, the world's biggest innovation campus. And we are talking to colleagues around cyber in Tokyo and in Dubai. So we recognize that idea of working collaboratively, working across clusters and creating a bigger critical mass. So that's enough for me. That's really what we do. Just to warn the panel, at the end, I'm going to ask you for a couple of practical things, actual things we can do, steps that we can do to actually change things for the better, to improve things after COVID, and ask either of government at a local, national, regional level, or of individuals, or of industry, or of investors. What are some practical things we can actually do to actually change the situation? So I'll come back to that at the end, and just to alert people watching that we also are running a series of polls today, which if you go into the polls section of the site, we'll be asking your opinions on a range of issues there as well. So that's enough from me. As I say, I'm going to stop gabbing, that's a Welsh word, and introduce you to, we have David Hartley and Nicola Headlam here at the moment. We're hoping to get James Jury on at any point. So perhaps if we start with you, Nicola, if you'd care to introduce yourself.
Oh, look.
Oh, look,
Yes.
and James has miraculously morphed into Ben Shorrock, who's also from the Bristol TechSpark.
I think James might be having a couple of issues, so I thought...
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm a little bit giddy because I'm actually out of the house in the co-working space that I use in Stockport called ProFolk. Thank you, ProFolk, for having me. As you can see, I've got a lovely Stockport mural behind me, and I just feel much better. This is the second time I've been out, so I was here Thursday, and so my background, I was an academic on regional innovation systems for nearly 20 years, and I don't know what I've done wrong, but I'm being invited out more and more often lately, so clearly somebody's interested in something. I'm freelance these days, which my dad worries means unemployed, but at the moment I'm overemployed because my research focus for a number of years has been the place where economics and space connect. So subnational economic development and regeneration policy, subnational governance, and where the sort of points of intersection really between ideas and then their bringing to fruition in exchange, the transformation of ideas within universities and within other settings into assets within a highly networked, rich ecosystem. And I've worked on the North for more years than I want to talk about. Most recently, I'm a recovering civil servant. I spent 1 year as head of the Northern Powerhouse for BEIS and MHCLG. And currently I'm working in an advisory capacity for the MP11 group of 11 LEP chairs in the north. Been doing some work just recently about the ways that the crisis is connecting with the business as usual proposition and how far. Do you want me to keep going, or do you want to say hello to everybody first?
No, that's great, Nicola. It sounds like you're a cross between a recovering something or other. So the 12 steps.
It's all recovery, yes.
And Game of Thrones, you know. So it's pretty, we'll come back to the leveling up agenda shortly. Let's just quickly introduce David, if you wouldn't mind. David from Scotland, from Scottish Enterprise. Perhaps tell us who you are, what you do, how it all works. David's muted for some reason.
Guys, if you hear a dog barking in the background, I do apologise. Noise of home working, and we've got a yappy little thing in this house. Yeah, so my name's David Hartley. I work for, I'm head up the digital economy team in Scottish Enterprise. For those of you not familiar, Scottish Enterprise is the main economic development agency in Scotland. We're funded by Scottish government. So the digital economy, as you might guess from that name, covers all aspects of digital economy. So we sort of split it in half: demand side development, helping people work, and that was an earlier topic today, and supply side, which is tech companies themselves. And that's obviously the theme for this particular part of the this particular meeting. So the cluster work, there's been a lot of work on clusters for a very long time. Way back in the 90s, 80s, there was a lot of work on clusters on semiconductors. So that was the sort of industry that brought me to Scotland back in 1989, a long time ago, working for Motorola. The cluster work sort of moved on quite a lot since then. And the way that we sort of look at it today is less around sort of geographic cluster and more around technology themes. So whether that's data or cyber or AI or whatever, this is a thing we've been looking at. One of the things this leads to is a number of initiatives, and this is something we'll talk about a bit later, is, in my mind, is from a cluster perspective, how do we better engage or share knowledge on the work that arises from our cluster experiences. And the other thing I should say is that from a cluster perspective, I've sort of got quite a bit of background in this area in terms of national or coordination of national clusters. So the sort of first stab at this was something Tech Nation tried, maybe, I don't know, 8-9 years ago or something like this. And several people that's been involved in this will be familiar with the work that Tech Nation did. But that never really got anywhere, particularly, I think, in sort of enabling collaboration across clusters in the UK. So that was something I'd be interested to talk about this afternoon as well. So that's me.
Yeah, that's very interesting point you've made there, David. That idea of, you know, we happen to be here, you know, on this screen from all four corners almost of the UK, but that idea of sectoral and sort of almost like vertical sort of clusters is very interesting. Again, very big semiconductor cluster, for instance, in South Wales, again, which we'd touch on in a bit. So Ben, representing Bristol, Ben from TechSpark, who's morphed out of James Dury into Ben Shorrock, but again, can cover much of the same territory as James. So just in a nutshell, Ben, just describe the sort of infrastructure you have around the Bristol and the West.
Sure. So less knowledgeable but more opinionated than James. So happy to jump in. We work TechSpark across the Bristol and Bath community, but a lot of what we've been doing in the last 12 months, 18 months is around extending that area and really trying to understand how we can better connect different clusters. So right across from Swindon, and we've been having lots of conversations with Mark and Mark's team about doing activity across Wales. So ultimately, we're not competing with Birmingham or Liverpool or Leeds or other UK cities. We're competing with Guangzhou and Silicon Valley and Berlin. So we need to look like superclusters ourselves. So there's been lots of activity in that space.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Ben, obviously there have also been sort of governmental initiatives, where Ben mentioned that idea of Wales working together with Bristol and the West Country. There is the Western Gateway Initiative, of course, which is now recently appointed its secretariat, and Catherine Bennett of Airbus is now the chair of that group. Again, Airbus being an organisation that has one foot in Bristol, in Filton, and one foot in Wales, in Broughton. So that idea of absolutely creating a degree of critical mass, which makes us more than the sum of our parts, which then enables us to work on a world stage, an international stage, is absolutely crucial these days. So I guess, Nicola, would you the Northern Powerhouse, I think, was one of the earliest iterations of this, of a real cluster with real critical mass and a degree of momentum. Can you talk us a bit about what you think the impact of that was, and whether that's a model we should be looking at? You muted, Nicola.
Still muted.
Sneak them up the sides.
No sneaky slides without letting us know.
Oh no, I was just to say. So I wanted to say a couple of things, so that just in case people aren't kind of economic development kind of nerds about the things that we've all touched on. So clearly, the kind of territorial cluster was in Michael Porter's original formulation from the 90s. But even in his work then, there was lots of thought about exactly much more global supply chains and connections. So I was reflecting that as an academic, you've always got your kind of gang that you collaborate with, even if they're in different countries. In some ways, they feel realer and closer to you than somebody down the road. And getting into some of that sort of information supply chain is fascinating, particularly in terms of monetizing and etc. So clusters, I would say there's only two kind of outstanding problems for cluster policy. And they are the biggest questions of all. They are time, when to intervene, and space, what spatial scale to intervene at. As you mentioned, the Northern Powerhouse experience, I give a very potted history. It's a 5-year-old concept. The Chancellor yesterday said that it was the most fantastic brand he'd ever come across. George Osborne has said that if he had had a penny for every time he'd used it, then he'd be, working for Nike or whatever. But it has had several iterations, and I would argue, as an ex-civil servant, that what it really lacked was the governance heft to be able to make policy decisions at the northern scale. And that isn't, so in some policy sectors, so for transport, they created a new institution, TfN, which is a statutory body and all that kind of thing. But for most economic development and innovation particularly, we were somewhat undergoverned and consequently somewhat underfunded, despite having the most fantastic brand, So in a sense, the Northern Powerhouse has kind of upset everybody because everybody thinks that we had everything for years, when actually, speaking extremely candidly, there was an awful lot of smoke and mirrors happening around what it actually was in terms of policy levers for delivery. So again, a longer version of this talk, I think that the third phase of the Northern Powerhouse sort of iterated into the levelling up agenda, which we saw a very encouraging budget response. Like literally the last thing I did before locking down was welcome the budget from a bloody freezing train station in Darlington. How excited I was about the levelling up agenda finally having some teeth and having some real money in it. And then I went home and I didn't go out again for 100 days. So the fact that there was still an extant to-do list around the governance structures required and the measure, the sort of sheer scale of investment that could be required for transformational change for the North. I think these things are well understood, and we're sort of poised. So apologies, civil servants, if any of you are still on, but doubling down on levelling up is supposed to mean something to somebody. But the effect actually of the virus has been, let me get this right, well, it's been to destroy the economy, hasn't it? So, I mean, the work that we've been looking at in terms of company death and in terms of insolvency, But the main stat that I kind of been carrying around with me, and I'm sorry to be a bit of a downer, I realise that tech events are normally quite bouncy and everyone's excited. Certainly in the north, and I think this is reflected for the rest of the country, 1.8 in 10 employees aren't going to end the year where they started it, and that's not through normal shifting about. So the fate of people on furlough, somebody I saw in the chat earlier on was talking, we're going to have a huge wave of furloughpreneurs. Well, that would be good. We're also going to have a huge wave of people experiencing the benefit system for the first time. And consequently, you cannot possibly lose sight of that. 1.8 in 10 are going to be churning through and changing jobs in the immediate next 3-4 months. And if the bright, shiny lights of tech can encourage some of them to set up or to scale businesses or to seek kind of solutions, then that's fantastic. But the scale of it is something that we're not ready for. So the challenge of leveling up was big enough, or the regional inequalities were entrenched enough, but this is another, it's a tsunami in terms of actual workforce. So it isn't, however ambitious around a transformational agenda, it's puny in terms of the challenge of the virus. So I don't mean to be slightly, and what I think is always the case, as I say, time and space are the only things that we're not sure about, but everything else is fine. Is the future is already here. It's just not very well differentiated. That sort of William Gibson quote. There are clusters of the next economy is already with us, and then there's also, you have to look at, so Lloyds Bank do their consumer digital index in terms of skill and in terms of accessing the digital economy, and there are still deep pits of lack of skill. So I'm sorry, that was all a bit downbeat, wasn't it?
Well, I think you've got to tell it like it is, to be honest. And interesting, you described Northern Powerhouse as smoke and mirrors, and whether the leveling up process was part of either a new set of smoke and mirrors or where there's real intent there is up for grabs, I think. David, north of the border, what would you say the Scottish experience is? Mic on, David.
I just want to add a silver lining to that cloud you've just been pointing. So from one perspective, we look at what's happened with digital industries. We know the overall economy is going to struggle, but a lot of digital companies have been extremely active over this period of time. You see the constant announcements of various digital products that people are starting to use. So whether it's farmers markets going online, people doing stuff in education, we see certain sectors where digital sort of like it's established some presence, but coming out of coronavirus, this presence is going to be much more significant. There's going to be significant investment, definitely in health, education, a whole raft of areas. And one of the sort of challenges, this might be something that could well be a good cross-cluster collaboration piece, is let's look on the optimistic side. There's a lot of work out there for companies. We see that companies, even at the worst of this in Scotland, were not anticipating significant redundancies from their staff, partly because digital skills are so rare, no matter what, we're going to still need them. But there's going to be possibly some significant demand opportunities coming along that we need skills for. Now, we know we've worked in the past on reskilling skills. So things like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with something called Code Clan that we have up here, which is, reskilling people into software skills. But if there's going to be a significant number of people now looking for work, not every one of them will be suitable or find this industry one to work in. But I think we have to sort of look at this and think we're going to have opportunity for work and people who are looking for work. We've got to find a way to fix them together. And that might well be quite a useful sort of cluster collaboration piece of work that could go on. Sorry to jump to you a bit at the end. Yeah,
no, that's fine. Again, I think it's interesting, that idea of, that was point made by David in his opening address, tech as a horizontal, I think, where it can work across all sectors, all market segments to actually to increase and to accelerate digital adoption, which can, you know, be helpful for all. I think that idea of that as a unifying force, absolutely. So whether that works then within clusters on a sector basis, or whether it can work geographically. Ben, just thinking, obviously, I think it's a fairly open secret that we have been talking about how Wales and the West Country, Bristol and the West Country, can work together more closely. The Western Gateway, I think, is a very useful sort of mechanism with which to achieve that in terms of bringing some of these things together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting. We are in unprecedented times, aren't we? There's some, you know, incredible challenges from COVID all the way through to Brexit, which are going to affect us in the next couple of years. So I think one of the things, and the reason we put on the event today, was there is a great deal of innovation happening across the UK. There is no silver bullet for the problems that we're talking about. They're all, it's a journey of 1,000 steps, I guess. And a lot of what we can learn, a lot of what we can do is by joining the dots. So are there programs that are being run in Scotland or by our colleagues in Sunderland where we know it works and we can effectively lift and shift those? And I think one of the things that, sorry, you can probably all hear my downstairs neighbour be having a party. One of the things we've learned from our conversations between TechSpark and Tramshed is actually some of the things that were very strong in our ecosystem on this side of the bridge, they aren't so strong on the Welsh side of the bridge and vice versa. So there's real opportunities to do things that are complementary. And I think it's interesting that a lot of that gets driven by the private sector, because for us, I don't have a political boundary. I don't really care where we end. It's what works for our community. And that gives us an opportunity to do things in a little easier way.
Scope for different parts of the UK, again, coming together in this wider way and indicating areas of specialism they may have. You know, I think this is a great idea here that we can collaborate, identify best practice, identify real core skills and expertise. So in Wales, for instance, South Wales, we've got the strongest cyber cluster in the UK, you know, bigger than all the other cyber clusters put together. Strong cyber in Belfast, I know. Other parts of the country would say, well, we're fantastic in AI or data or manufacturing. Is there a way we can spread the love, so to speak, and actually all collaborate together so that, you know, so that tech in the UK, you know, UK tech as a combined force can actually find lots of different markets by helping each other share that?
I think absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yes, Nicola.
Yeah, I think that sounds incredibly exciting. Except, of course, as long as you all accept that the north shoring of companies to the Northern Powerhouse would definitely be the best route for. We can all do our pitch. I
think the Games of Thrones analogy is actually, we got the Queen there. Actually, I can see this. David, just thinking about your strategy.
I just want to make one comment as well. It was something someone used earlier about being in competition. I think I don't know the name of the guy. Our fourth member of the panel. His name's not up on here.
Julie.
James.
Well, Ben is actually here though.
Ben. Okay, so it's Ben. Sorry, Ben. You said something interesting at the start, and this is something that struck me: is the notion of competition when it comes to clusters, and I don't really buy this too much, because I think the opportunity is so significant. When you talk about competition, what are you competing with and for? And I think this isn't the case. You're not competing for money, because the money's out there to come in if you have the good ideas. Generally, you're not competing for talent, because people are living in different areas, although there is some talent migration. And we hear it in language, you know, like you used it as well, Mark, the biggest cyber cluster, or we joke about this a little time, but I think this is not very helpful when we're trying to talk about collaboration. We should really not be looking to sort of big ourselves up. The talks by the various people at the start of the day was this sort of typical sort of, we're doing great in Manchester or Liverpool. I find this, at least from this type of discussion, we should leave it outside the door, because what we should be thinking of is how to collaborate. So I could sit here and say, we've got the greatest thing going in CivTech. Right? It's not important, right? What I think is great or not. The question is whether or not it's something useful that other people can learn from, because we should be looking to maximize our good experiences. So it's just a bit of a beef for me about how this word competition creeps in. And I think it's it's a wrong way to think about this, and it will limit our ability to collaborate.
Well, I think it's that's always been the problem with going back to looking at Michael Porter, because it's about competitive advantage being leveraged from collaborative advantage. And I do agree with you that it should be the other way around. And particularly, it must, and that's what I said, it's about when to intervene and where. But I think that economic development has been bedeviled by a very deals orientated, very transactional, competitive culture. And I think you're absolutely right that we need to find a way away from it. But and the MP11 is across the 11 LEPs of the North, and that's very difficult to collaborate across that territory. I think also that there is a sense that we represent sort of the great regions of the UK and nations of the UK, but there's lots of work done on the effect of London on the centripetal or centrifugal effect of London on the whole market. And again, I mentioned North Shoring, obviously, to any direction, just because as land rents value, as land values rise, there's opportunities for everybody to offset some of the externalities of the capital into our regional hubs and our regional clusters.
So I guess we've got literally 1 minute left. Don't know where that's gone. And I think, that idea of can we level up everywhere, so that everywhere levels up to a higher level, I absolutely agree. Collaboration is the key, not so much competition, but let's all collaborate and use all those strengths together. You've got 20 seconds each, guys. If you had to pick, I'll bring it down from 5. One thing, one lever, one instrument, one ask of anything, that would make a real difference. David?
I think skills and bringing more people into this area to help us support our growth.
Fantastic. Nicola?
I would just like to continue the conversation with you guys. That would be my thing.
Well, that's an open invitation we'll gladly accept. Ben, over to you.
Some real money. I think if we're going to do this, it needs money behind it. It doesn't just need Boris Johnson saying levelling up once every 3 months.
Okay, well, that's a very fitting way to end it. Thank you to everyone. Thanks to Nicola. Thanks to David. Thanks for Ben for standing in the last moment. And just to let you know that you've got another session now, which my colleague is going to tell me where to go to actually to get these.
Very good. Right, cheerio, guys.
Thank you, guys. So the next sessions are: how can tech support the food and drink industry? How can tech get us to net zero? And how can smart communities, smart cities make communities resilient? So nice to see you guys, and we shall catch up again later.